Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, August 28th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about President Joe Biden and his deteriorating approval rating at its lowest point we've ever seen it over time. Now, Joe Biden has been president for just over 6 months now, and you can actually see here that in the entirety of his presidency, he had been approved of by significant amounts. I mean, up until recently, the number hadn't dropped below double digits, and that was around June when it was still in the plus 10, plus 11 range, and then it became plus 8, plus 9, and then rapidly it went from plus 8, and then 2 weeks later, all the way down to plus 4, and 2 weeks following that, to the disapprove being up by 1 point, according to Real Clear Politics. Now, they're not the only ones who show Joe Biden in the negative at this point. 538 finally has released their numbers in which show that Joe Biden is at some point amongst a negative amount, depending on where you look. You look at the polls of registered voters or likely registered voters, it's in the negative. You take a look at all adults, and the margin here is 0.3%, but the point being that Joe Biden's approval rating has officially hit the lowest point we have ever seen. And actually, right before this video had hit, but right as I started recording, actually, they just added in this new Ipsos poll just a second ago, and it actually showed Joe Biden in the negative. But point being, I think it might have been right around this point, except the disapprove was above the approve by half a percentage point. That was because Suffolk University, I guess the one that they just pushed down because of a slew of new polls that just released today, but it showed that Joe Biden was disapproved of by 14 points nationally speaking. 538 adjusted for inaccuracies and showed that it was negative 10 nationwide, according to that poll. So all around, Joe Biden's approval rating is in the negative, not in a good position. 47.2% when quite literally 2 weeks ago you were above 50%, and 2 weeks prior to that you were at 53% nationwide. I mean, what has happened to Joe Biden's approval ratings? Essentially, just a number of things are starting to be pushed back by the American public, whether it's the coronavirus response, whether it's the response to Afghanistan, whether it's the economy. Everything is starting to be unveiled in a sense where they are starting to question whether or not they truly approve of Joe Biden as a president, and it is very clear that it is at a very pivotal moment for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, as the approval rating of the president absolutely matters for upcoming elections. Now, if you take a look, 538 does not do it by breakdown, but you can actually see here that Real Clear Politics shows the approval rating of the economy. For the entirety of the presidency, it had been in the positive up until now. For the issue of immigration, it had gone from being in the positive earlier on to being in the negative for a while, but now some say negative 37, negative 37, negative 16, negative 22, with the best for Joe Biden being disapproved of by 6 points. Foreign policy, not good at all. Negative 4.3%, again, was in the positive, plus 20, plus 14. Joe Biden ran on that campaign that he would be good for international relations, that he would be good for talking to foreign leaders. Clearly, the American public does not feel the same way at this point in time. And when you take a look at the handling of the coronavirus, while these numbers are still in the positive, plus 10 nationwide isn't the worst thing for Joe Biden. I know it may be surprising for me to say this isn't the worst thing, but the reason why I'm saying that is because it was actually at a much higher position during the entirety of his presidency. Started out with the first poll showing plus 38. Most recently, you can actually see here plus 40 in May, according to Harvard-Harris. You can see here that in July, Harvard-Harris releases another poll, plus 26. The Hill, Harris-X releases one in August, plus 24, and then it started to drop down because of the COVID-19 variants. That was something that really is going across this nation and harming a lot of people, and people are starting to realize, even though President Biden has promised to make COVID-19 his number one priority, they may not think that it is his number one priority anymore. They may not think that it is working because the mask mandates are starting to come back up. People are starting to get sick, and while it is correctly spoken, the pandemic of the unvaccinated at this point, while breakthrough cases do occur, it is still 95% effective at preventing getting COVID-19 and getting hospitalized, which is something that needs to be pointed out. The vaccines absolutely work, but 95% does not mean 100%. But looking at what is happening with the coronavirus, unvaccinated individuals are getting sick, and people are starting to be upset because these unvaccinated people are getting sick, and because you can still transmit COVID-19 with the vaccine, not necessarily get sick from it, even though it's possible. Point being, people don't want to be in that scenario. The Delta variant was only 5% of the cases back in June across the nation, and today it's over 90%. The Delta variant has proved to be very detrimental to the American public, and thus they're going to take it out on whoever is in the highest position in office. In that case, it's President Joe Biden. But if you take a look at the approval rating compared to previous presidents. I mean, at this point in time, Barack Obama was at his fallout range, getting out of that honeymoon stage. Now, Barack Obama started out with a 68% approval rating. Joe Biden only started out with a 53% approval rating. So the fact that Joe Biden was able to level out for such a long time and pretty much just maintain that popularity despite not starting out at nearly as high of a point as Barack Obama is something that needs to be pointed out. From 68% to 53%, I mean, that's a massive drop. And you can see here that, they were actually not necessarily neck and neck, but at points in time were within each other. And then eventually, Obama was able to last on a little bit longer because he had that much higher approval rating than Joe Biden, so a lot more room to fall. And Joe Biden officially has dipped below 50% around, that happened around day 321 for Barack Obama. This is happening for Joe Biden around day 220. So just around 100 days more for Barack Obama. And if you take a look at Donald Trump, in fact, looking at his approval rating around this time period, I mean, you're talking about what, day 220? This was probably one of the lowest points of Donald Trump's presidency besides his final day in office. If you take a look at the numbers here, I mean, the approval rating of Trump leading into December of 2017 was the lowest point we had ever seen it for the president of the United States. I mean, just 38% of the nation approved of him. Leading into that election, actually, in 2020, 45% of the nation approved of Donald Trump as president of the United States. So obviously something recovered. You don't go from being down 20 points to being down just 7 points on election day. That's why Donald Trump was perceived as so unelectable, and even for his re-election bid back in 2017, 2018, because his approval rating was much worse than it was on election day. But you can take a look here. This seems to be the time period in which the president is disapproved of, at least for Donald Trump, by the largest amount, besides the day of his final day in office, for obvious reasons, the insurrection, the second impeachment, whatever it might be. But for this case, I mean, you can see here that there seems to be some connection between Joe Biden's approval rating dropping and Donald Trump's as well. Now, Donald Trump's was never too high. Donald Trump's highest approval rating was 45% across the nation, and then it just ended up in the negative. But you can see here that at around this time period was when the presidents began to fall out of public favor. Even for Barack Obama, leading into the months of December of 2009, that was when his approval rating started to dwindle as well. Didn't apply to the case of George W. Bush for 9/11. Bill Clinton, however, had a very similar reaction. In fact, his approval rating dipped immediately after office. I mean, you're talking about over 100 days out, but still around that time period where you're getting a lot of things done. 38% of the public approved of him at this point, and he won re-election by a larger margin than he won that first election. In fact, on the day of his end of his first 4 years, had a 61% approval nationwide. So looking at the numbers for Joe Biden, I think the Democratic Party should be very worried. They should look at the presidential election results, they should look at the Senate election results, and the House election results from the 2020 election, because at that point in time, Joe Biden was viewed of favorably by 7 points. Today, that favorability rating is just plus 1% nationwide. In the beginning of his presidency, even beyond the time that he was inaugurated, you would see here that plus 20 was a regular, plus 26, plus 11, plus 10, plus 15. And it continued. It continued on and on and on. And then it went down to single digits, which made sense. His approval rating was beginning to falter, and the American public was turning on him as a popular figure. But you can see here that, still it was able to maintain. And then all of a sudden, USA Today, Suffolk University released a poll that showed him negative 15 in terms of the favorability rating for him as a person. Now, the reason why the numbers are different than the Joe Biden job approval rating is because someone can like Joe Biden but not necessarily like the job he's doing in office. The same thing for Donald Trump. If you take a look at some of his favorability rating numbers from back in January of 2020, they don't exactly match how low his approval rating was or how high his disapproval rating was on election day, on election day, on his final day in office in 2020. So if we go ahead and see, or 2021, the favorability rating over time, I'm not entirely sure if they have more recent polls. I mean, they do, negative 13, negative 8, negative 11. It's not as bad as it is for Joe Biden, but it still is something to point out. And I don't think it has loaded yet, but if we scroll down to around the time period of the insurrection, I mean, yes, there were some very negative points, but the point was that the approval rating of the president was in a position where it was worse off, I would say, for Donald Trump than it was in terms of the favorability rating. This is something that he should have been very worried about, and the Republicans also should have been very worried about. Just looking at these House elections for Joe Biden, I mean, it is something that needs to be said that the numbers in the House elections were a result of a Joe Biden plus 7% nationwide. If Joe Biden is not approved of by 7 points, it questions whether or not Democrats can hold on to some of these very key seats, as they are going to be very important for the House elections in 2022, very important for the Democratic Party and some of their potential victories in the upcoming midterm elections. I think that it is just very important for Joe Biden and the Democrats to recognize that they are falling out in terms of public opinion, that they are not necessarily doing as well as they were before, because if they don't recognize that, they will be in a position where they will be clobbered in the upcoming midterms, where they will be decimated, whether it's in the Senate elections or the House elections. They need to ensure that they recognize this, because they did a bit of a course correction actually back in 2020, which is another reason that I do want to point this up. If you take a look at the favorability rating of Joe Biden over time, let's see here if we can actually get to it. I think we just crossed over from the Trump portion of it, but you can see here that the Joe Biden approval rating in the past, once it actually loads in, was actually pretty negative before the Democratic National Convention. The Democratic National Convention was used in many ways not necessarily to just convince voters to vote for Joe Biden or against Donald Trump, but also to change the narrative about Joe Biden, and it absolutely worked. You can actually see here that the approval rating of Joe Biden was pretty negative before the DNC, and then after he spoke and after a number of images that were emotional, had to do with family ties, whatever it might be, showed Joe Biden in a more positive manner, that's when the public started to change their opinion on Joe Biden, started to say that, hold on a second, I actually think that this guy is a good guy. And it lasted up until now. That plus 1.3% is something that should be very alarming for the Democratic Party. This is something that they should not be in a position of. Joe Biden is, in many ways, a likable figure, and that should not be ignored. They should be able to be taking away advantage of what is going on, with Joe Biden, that he is someone who can pretty much just win over the American public by being a genuine figure. But it seems that the pressing matters of today, whether Afghanistan, whether COVID-19, or the economy, seem to be more important to the American public, that it is spilling over into the favorable/unfavorable region. Taking a look at the ratings for the governor elections, for the Senate elections, you should expect some of these to change. I mean, looking at what we expect in the Senate elections over time, Democrats probably are not nearly in as powerful position in this map as they are today. This Senate map is going to change. Democrats are going to receive blowback because of what's happening with Joe Biden, and that needs to be understood. In addition, though, I did just make a video talking about the 2021 governor election in the state of Virginia, saying that Democrats shouldn't necessarily be super worried about that Virginia race, just because it seems that the approval rating of Joe Biden isn't proving to be detrimental, at least in a heavy sense, to Terry McAuliffe and Democrats across the state. But obviously, we still have to wait for that election, which is surprisingly just around the corner. I think in just under 3 months, somewhere around there, we will actually see Election Day, actually around 2 months, and the California recall election will be the first true test of Democratic support and Democratic loyalty across the nation, which could also have implications because of Joe Biden's approval rating. In fact, the Democratic Party instead only is sending over Vice President Harris and not President Biden to California to campaign for Gavin Newsom, when the original plan was to get both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to campaign for him, because, of course, at the time, they were figures that were regarded as the top Democrats, well-known figures, someone who could be popular enough to excite the Democratic electorate. But right now, I don't think they see that happening with Joe Biden. And while Kamala Harris is not approved of by a higher amount than Joe Biden, she still is in that position where that's her home state. She has the home state advantage and recently won an election there in 2016, 2014, 2010, in red wave years. In all three of them, ultimately showing that she, even though it's California, I understand that, still can be able to win over voters and pretty much just defy the expectations of some type of, not the necessary expectations as in she was expected to lose, but can still win over voters in different types of climates and versatile climates, as she did in 2020, 2016, 2014, and 2010. But do I think that, Kamala Harris is someone who is highly regarded across the nation? No, I never said that. But in California, that is the state that she represented as the Attorney General and as a senator from, and I think that's something that will be helping Gavin Newsom in this upcoming recall election. But I think it was very clear what they were saying when Joe Biden was no longer going to be even considering going over to California, even though if his approval rating rebounds in the next 2 weeks, he might in the final stretch. Other than that, I can't really imagine that Joe Biden is going to receive any positive media coverage for visiting California amidst all of these crises, or something that will just excite the Democratic electorate if the American public is slowly turning against him, and he is now at his lowest approval rating that he has ever seen during the entire time of his presidency. But this will likely not be the lowest point. I don't want to say this as, this is going to be the lowest point ever for Joe Biden. It just is the lowest point ever today. And that is worth noting because Joe Biden has been in that honeymoon period. And I said about a month ago that this honeymoon period seems to be over, but it is not as bad then as it is today. And just understanding that is something that needs to be, clear within the Democratic Party. Looking at these numbers over time, I mean, they held on to that 53%, 54%, 52% for the longest period of time. And it took one crisis abroad that was obviously in many regards viewed as a humanitarian crisis, is something that is very important to the American public, but it took a very major scandal to bring down Joe Biden, and it does question, when he will recover, if he will recover in the immediate future, whatever it might be, because of what's happening in Afghanistan and across the nation. There are a number of implications about Joe Biden's approval rating deteriorating, whether it comes down to the economy, coronavirus, Afghanistan, etc. A lot of things tie into this deteriorating approval rating. But Democrats need to be on their A game because Joe Biden is no longer there to hold them up with his high approval rating. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.